Okay, so we're live streaming. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first Attire seminar of 2022, hosted by HUMA, the Institute for Humanities in Africa at the University of Cape Town. And we're coming to you today from Stellenbosch, just outside of Cape Town, where the HUMA team is having a series of workshops over the last few days in disobedient epistemologies. So I know there are going to be some resonances with today's speaker, Elleke Boehmer, who is also writing about writing from the South, both wording and worlding the South. And Elleke is a professor of world literature in the English faculty at University of Oxford and director of the Oxford Centre for Life Writing at Wolfson College. And she's a founding figure in the field of post-colonial and world literature studies in English. Elleke has written a number of books. She is in Cape Town at the moment at UCT, working on a project called Southern Imagining, and that's a project exploring understandings of the world from the global South. I was interested in just one little resonance that came up with today's readings. We were looking at that classic text, Provincializing Europe, and I was thinking about Elleke's worlding the South, which seems like it has some relationship to that as well, a kind of a counterpoint, or a mirror, a reflection. So thanks to all our colleagues who are here in the Zoom room as well. And thanks to the friends of Elleke who are here as well, and everyone here who is participating in the seminar. So Elleke, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. And please do, say hello and share your screen when you're ready. You have a presentation for us for the first half of the seminar.
Great. Thank you so much, Ralph, for setting this up and making me feel welcome in the seminar. Thank you to everyone for coming. I am going to speak for about half an hour, as Ralph said. I'm going to try to locate us in the project using my PowerPoint. And I will also make reference to the pieces that you may have had a chance to have a look at before this moment, or otherwise that you may be interested in referring to in due course. So I'm just going to start the screen share now. Here we go. Can everyone see that? I will just take non-message and non-hand as assent. So the title that I'm speaking to is Imagining and Wording the South, and I think especially the word wording will become clearer as we proceed. One of the pieces that you've had that's been disseminated in advance is from a book called Worlding the South, to which I contributed. And it's my sense that wording the South helps us to world the South from the vantage point of the South, as I will explore in this talk. And with the accent on exploration and also navigation, I'm using as my kind of guiding icon, as my map, this fascinating Marshall Islands stick and shell map from the South Seas, from the Pacific Ocean, which was used by Pacific Islanders to navigate from one island to another across the amazingly large scattered clustering of archipelagos of the Pacific Islands. This stick map lines up in relation to the stars. Shells mark different points of setting and rising of the stars on the horizon. And I'm also taking it as my talisman in this talk. The talk comes in 3 parts, but just before I launch into the first part, I would just like as another map for us to it's not moving for me. Oh, there we go. Ha, what did I do? Anyway, I would just like to locate us in the chapter outline of the book project from which I'm speaking, and also refer you to give you a bit of a mini map in relation both to the talk and to the book project. So the book will have 7 chapters. It's actually 8 with a prelude, because the introduction counts as chapter 0, and the prelude, you will get some sense of it from the podcast that I shared, that I did with Nancy Richard on southing, and the South in the World. That essay is drawn from the prelude. Also, the talk that I gave at UWC a couple of weeks ago was drawn from the introduction to this book project, South, the World's Outside. And today I'm speaking really to chapter 1, and then bracketing the book. Chapter 6 also fed into the UWC talk, where I talked about Alexis Wright, who I will come around to talking about just momentarily today, touch on. And then Far Away Close, the more impressionistic piece that you have access to, will probably in the end constitute chapter 7 of this project. So the middle portion is in the process of being written, but I haven't. The middle portion is kind of more conventionally literary. So with that, with those 2 maps to hand, I will begin with the first part of my talk. And here I'm spinning the world, and I'm taking us south to a southern orientation. This is the blue marble picture as it was seen from Apollo 11. The other picture, the previous picture with the world as it were the right way up, is the picture as it was disseminated in the world, across the world's media. It was flipped upside down because that was, of course, that is the more conventional view, but it's this view that I'm exploring in this work of Southern Imagining and that I'm talking through today in this presentation. And what I'd like to do now is to just for us to really meditate on 4 Southern words from Southern indigenous languages. And I begin with this lovely word, and pardon my pronunciation of all these words. I wish I could have learned or have some proper knowledge of all the Southern languages that I'm referring to today. This is from Yagan, which is now a sleeping language. There is one remaining speaker, first language speaker of Yagan, and she is about 89 years old. Yagan, a language of Tierra del Fuego in the very south of South America, was collected by a missionary in the 1870s. He compiled a remarkable dictionary of Yagan, and his name was Thomas Bridges. And this is one of the first words in his dictionary, a Yagan English dictionary, ayagata, which is a word to describe the movement of a whale, very prevalent in southern waters, of course, a whale rising up on end and raising its flukes. And here is a word from Gamilaroi, an indigenous language of New South Wales, Australia, Namalai. It is a greeting implying relationship. I to you and you to me. Namalai is the word that you would use if you already kind of know the person, but you're seeing them again after not having seen them for a while. So it's a greeting implying community, implying reciprocity. And here, coming to perhaps more familiar ground for some of us, chocha or chocho, which is a word in the Dictionary of South African English, a word in Afrikaans, according to the dictionary, but it's from Khoi Khoi. You will notice that in tracing these words, and become very clear in the next slide, in tracing these words, I'm moving from words that are really kind of outside of English, steadily, towards being included in at least one dictionary of English, and in the next word you'll see in the OED, the kind of the dictionary of global English. But as many of you will know, chocha is a word from Khoi Khoi through Afrikaans into South African English for an insect, a creepy crawly. And here we have boomerang, also actually a word from Gamilaroi, it first occurs in English, in an English context. In the first recorded use is from the Sydney Gazette of 1804. Of course, as we know, it refers to an Australian missile weapon, a curved piece of hard wood from 2 to 3 feet long with a sharp edge along the convexity of the curve. It is so made as to describe complex curves in flight. And of course, one of those curves is that it comes back, it loops back to the person who has thrown it. And so it has become not only a noun in English, but in fact also a verb, to boomerang. And there's something very appropriate about the word, that it has kind of boomeranged from Australia, from Gamilaroi to into the OED, if you like, and then back to the south, where it is, of course, still used by Gamilaroi speakers, as well as, of course, by all English speakers. So that was just to kind of to invite us all just to kind of to think about these southern words, these words that have come into the northern language English, a remarkable Creole that at least those of us here in this seminar speak, but have come from different parts of the South. And I'm wanting to suggest throughout this talk that these words are in their own way kind of navigational devices, are in their own way maps, Southern concepts to open up Southern understanding. Indigenous Southern languages and stories are or were congruent with the experiences of people on the land and the oceans. And their knowledge of inhabiting the land and navigating the South's waters is buried in, is embedded in the words and also in the stories. We'll say a bit more about the stories as we go. So moving into the second part of this presentation, Southern imagining, some cardinal points. And here's the core question, the opening question. How do we conceive of our planet otherwise, from a counterintuitive Southern direction? Remember that the world, when it was seen from outer space, the blue marble had to be flipped upside down for the consumption of the world's media. So how do we, to pick up Ralph's word, from Deepesh Chakrabarti right at the beginning, how do we actually provincialize? How do we conceive of our planet from a southerly direction, a Southern direction? Remembering that most recognized theory, right, the frameworks with which we think, are from the North. And I'm going to propose, and I have already been proposing through that kind of object lesson of dwelling in those words, through local words, local concepts, and with stories of here, stories of the South. And I think very important that I'm speaking to you here from Cape Town, from the South. And here, and I mean, and I, you know, there's an object lesson in my very reference to Northern linguists, Sapir and Worf. In order to make my point, there is, you know, a salutary and a sobering object lesson in that. If, as the linguists Sapir and Worf argued, our understanding of the world is shaped by the words we have to name it, then I propose renaming the South using Southern words offers a way of reawakening Southern knowledge. It is a way of seeing the South from the South, of bringing Southern experiences and life fragments into Northern languages, conceptual, heuristic, and cartographic languages that now largely represent Southern spaces. And you remember that the previous slide talked about how Southern experiences, Southern life experiences are embedded in these words. And here I'd just like to draw in again to kind of, you know, locate us with reference to the materials I shared. The concept that I was exploring in Far Away Close and that I would like to kind of to bring in here is the idea of the imagined quality of distance itself as a measure. The idea of the far away certainly shapes global understanding of the far South. You know, ways in which, say, Tierra del Fuego or Antarctica or the South Island of New Zealand are often seen, understood, and described from the vantage point of the metropolitan, you know, Anglo-American North, is as very, very far away, right? So but that is often seen as quite a disabling concept, but I want to suggest that there's something in it that we might use in order to center the South and center ourselves in the South. And then to align some of this talk with the other piece that I shared, The South in the World, what that piece explores, which is what the book is also going to delve into, is the idea of, or to kind of float in amongst, is the idea of oceanic thinking. There are a number of, you know, interesting researchers at the moment working in this area, and quoting from the piece, the idea that the far extremities of the great oceans defy our attempts to circumscribe and understand their immensity, especially those pitched from the north. And we remember here, of course, that about 80% of the Southern Hemisphere is ocean, is water. It's very important, whereas only 60% of the Northern Hemisphere is water. What The South in the World, that piece also tries to do, is to talk about unraveling the representational strategies and entangled histories that made the South conceivable as an object, right? These ideas of the South and the far South always projected from the North. So I'm proposing that we try to unravel some of those projected ideas through Southern words and Southern stories, and that this is a way of worlding ourselves in the South, and then exploring Indigenous and Black knowledge of Southern environments. Oops, don't know what happened there. So is there something about Southern worlds that by definition, and this was also implied in the reference to oceanic thinking, that by definition must remain always beyond our analytic, a little beyond our analytic reach, that the South ultimately far eludes scholarly indices of otherness. And I think this is an enabling, not a disabling, elusiveness. And I would like us, I mean, and this is something that I'm doing in the project, but in this time that we have now, to think about the implications and glimmerings of the alternative worlds that Southern words and Southern writings open to us, the readers, the perceivers of these words. Without reinstating, and here I'm semi-quoting again from the South and the world, without reinstating institutions of literature with a capital L, I suggest that it is through the border traversing, world opening capacities of Southern writing and reading that new perspectives on the South, from the South, may be sparked. In a word, reworlding crucially begins with the insights of imaginative wording and imaginative writing. Ideas of archipelagos, already anticipated with my Marshall Islands map, are extremely productive here. The work of the Pacific Islands theorist Epele Haofa, that some of you may know, he has explored in his work the idea of archipelagic reading, which respects the character of the South by considering how its oceanic energies interact with and sweep around its land masses. Think again of that 80% of water. Archipelagic reading also invites us to think pluricentrically, so archipelagically, shedding light on the interlaced oceans, lands and islands in the totality of their relationships. You might remember Namalai, that greeting implying reciprocity. Oceans, lands, and islands in the totality of their relationships. Something like this map, perhaps, allows us also to imagine and conceive. So the Spillhouse projection gives us the world as arrayed around the oceans from the vantage of the South Pole and the Southern Ocean. So now moving into my third and closing section of this presentation. Wording the South then. Words becoming a vital instrument for understanding and experiencing Southern lives from within. Avoiding, sidestepping, or eluding, even if only to a degree, the imposition of Northern concepts, Northern theory, and Northern frameworks. So this also means working against the perverse colonial archive, and here the work of Sandra Young at UCT is extremely interesting and provocative for this work. And she refers to Roseanne Kennedy, who also talks about working against the colonial archive with the archive, because it has preserved, as with the Thomas Bridges Yagan English dictionary, it has preserved artifacts of knowledge from the South that are now quiescent or no longer are used. But of course, it is an archive that has been collected through various violent processes. So it is a perverse archive, which we need to kind of work with circumspectly and with awareness. Here is a Torres Strait Islander, so from the islands to the north of Australia, who said, and I found this when I kind of read an interview with him about learning Mabuag, which is the language of his people, learning it as a second language, because he learned English as a first language, even though Mabuag is his, as it were, the language of his people. I found this very, this kind of was spot on. It spoke absolutely to what I'm trying to do with this idea of Southern words as opening up Southern worlds. And he said, if learning single words was like learning about the stars in the sky again, then learning through songs and stories was like connecting the stars and realizing full constellations. Remember, think of archipelagos. Now I have, through learning Mabuag, a more profound understanding about the imperative of harnessing language as a tool to understanding and privileging our ways of knowing and being. Thank you to Ali Jimmy Drummond. The travel writer Barry Lopez coming into this from a very, very different perspective, but nonetheless, again, a kind of, has offered some fascinating provocations from talking to elders, for example, in Australia and in the very, very north of North America, talking there to, for example, Inuit people about their understanding of snow and cold. He has said in Arctic Dreams and also in his book Horizon, that the stories that unfold against the local landscape. So again, it's the idea of the local words embedded in local landscapes that give expression to it. These give expression to the enduring relationships of life and are as critical for people as food or water. The mythic landscape is not the natural landscape, but the two overlap at certain visible points in the land. And remember again, that idea of words as embedded in landscape, in locale. So what happens then when we move to indigenous and or local understandings of and vocabulary for southern environments? What happens when we kind of energize the idea of the boomerang, right? The flip there and back again in thinking about the South. And here's where songs and chants and heritage texts and other oral poetry and stories, conceptions and lore of the stars and oceans speak the environment, not from the outside looking in, but from within, that is emerging out of southern space. There have been remarkable language retrieval projects across the global south. One in particular that I would like to single out, it's been going for some time now, from the 1980s, brought, at least to my awareness, by Boaventura de Sousa Santos, who's done some remarkable work on epistemologies of the South. It's the title of one of his books. But here from Cognitive Empire, he draws our attention to the Taller de Historia Oral Andina, founded in Bolivia in '83, on Silvia Rivera's Cusquianqui initiative. From the start, the objective of this project has been to build the proper history of the indigenous people of the Andean region, a history told by themselves and as reflecting their worldviews and ways of life, their views on their struggles throughout the centuries, their heroes and their aspirations concerning justice, dignity, and self-determination. You'll start to see a kind of convergence coming through with these different slides, these different perspectives from different language retrieval projects, including the one that I'm sort of commenting on here in my own work. And here I'd like to home in now a little more closely on some of what I'm doing. I'm thinking in particular in this, what will in the end be the first chapter of Southern Imagining. I'm thinking in particular of words for stories and legends and understandings of the skies, in particular of the Milky Way, and what stories of the Milky Way have been made to, how they've been used to signify kind of location in place, but also a way of measuring the seasons. Here's a representation of the Milky Way from the Yamaji community group. It's a Western Australian group of people. A number of different artists worked on this remarkable canvas. Oops, oh dear, I really do need to go back, but I have no idea how one goes back.
Just the arrow keys, maybe, like up and down, or left and right. Excellent,
thank you. Oh, wonderful. Here is the Milky Way, as for anyone who's been who's looked at the southern night sky from the vantage point of the Karoo, for example. You may recognize this. This is an image taken from Australia. But the Milky Way obviously does the same thing in the southern night sky above the Karoo. This is the phenomenon known to a number of different indigenous Australian groups across the Australian continent as the emu in the sky. In Khoisan legend, also referred to as the ostrich in the sky. The Milky Way, because of the Earth kind of spinning on its axis, the Milky Way appears to kind of turn in our skies across the seasons. It looks a bit like this at the moment, and then as March becomes April, May, and then June, it kind of tips upright so that the ostrich is, as it were, or the emu is, as it were, sort of sitting on its nest, and that is in fact when ostriches do lay their eggs and emus do lay their eggs. So this has been used by southern peoples, this idea or story of the emu in the sky has been used to mark the seasons. The anthropologist Bruce Pascoe has done some wonderful work on the dark emu. Alongside that work, I would like to place the stories of the Pleiades or the Seven Sisters, which is a constellation, a little, if you know your Orion, in the northern southern sky. It's a constellation kind of to the below and to the left, a small cluster of stars, which does set around late March, April, and then rises again in July. So again, it's interesting to me, very interesting, and I'm doing a lot of thinking and reflection on this. It's interesting that these stars, this cluster, often referred to as the Seven Sisters, the Seven Brothers, the family, the Seven Travelers, sometimes the Six Travelers, it's a prevalent story right the way kind of across the southern continents. Occurs in Khoisan, occurs in Xhosa myth also. And just by way of reminding us, this loops back to some of the earlier slides from Barry Lopez. Aboriginal culture's oral nature and oral transmission of knowledge is extremely important, particularly in regard to the law. Aboriginal law governs all aspects of life, establishing a person's rights and responsibilities to others, the land and natural resources. Again, that idea of reciprocity between human beings, between humans and animals, the emu, the ostrich, and also with the land. And again, reinforcing that idea. And here's a little bit of work that I've done with word lists of Khoisan, which was really, really striking when I first came to it, and remains incredibly exciting. With great gratitude to Menan Duplessis, who shared some of her lists from Khoi and from Kora language with me. These are languages that are now spoken by very, very few people as first language. But have a look at this. It's not as clear on this slide, but on this one, it's quite wonderful, quite remarkable. And I'm sorry that it is, the lettering is quite small here. But if you look at these star names from Kora that Menan Duplessis and other researchers have collected, I've highlighted there in blue the number of words, the kind of the concentration of words which refer to rising and setting stars, so the Pleiades and to Orion. So not interestingly to some of the southern constellations that tend not to set dependent on the season. So certainly not the Southern Cross, for example, which is kind of always in the southern skies below a certain latitude. I think it's 27 or 28 degrees south. but rather the constellations that rise and set and so mark the seasons. Notice the concentration of those in this word list. So moving on, there's a lot we could say about that, and we can maybe talk about it in the questions. So here, just kind of, wrapping up, or I mean, I'm not sure I'm comfortable with the idea of wrapping up, but I like things to be open-ended, to open out. Insofar as words and worlds are involved, the one and the other, and, the genuflection to Northern theory, Wittgenstein, to talk about lives lived in and from the South, it's important to reawaken and be aware of Southern words, concepts, phrasing, and traditions, and how they combine into legends, songs, chants, storytelling, and imaginative writing. And here, another particular talisman on my southern travels across the continents, navigating by the stars, is Alexis Wright, the Indigenous Australian writer. Carpentaria is particularly central to my work at the moment, and it's I would just like to read this and have, perhaps you could have these two images in mind as I read. Here is the Gulf of Carpentaria, from which Alexis Wright writes after some devastating floods in 2019, January, February. And here is something of the idea. It's an enhanced photograph, but it very much captures the kind of thing I'm trying to evoke, and will in my reading of the Alexis Wright in a moment. The idea of navigating by the stars, but where the stars are also reflected in the waters that we are moving across, as when we are doing oceanic thinking. So here's the Alexis Wright. When the central character, he's an elder in Carpentaria, when Normal Phantom talked about the stars, they said he knew as much about the sky as he did about the water. The mob said he had always chased the constellations. We watched him as a little boy running off into the night trying to catch stars. They were certain he knew the secret of getting there. They thought he must go right up to the stars in the company of the groper fish when it stormed at sea, when the sea and the sky became one, because otherwise, how could he have come back? And then, as another elder recognizes, it's the same world as I live in, the world of dreaming, the same world as I live in, and before that, no such thing as a contemporary world. Which is why work like Theory from the South by John and Jean Komarov is actually not helpful at all to this project, because it is work that thinks through modernity. And whereas what I'm trying to do is tip over to ideas from words embedded in land and embedded in starscapes, and woven in with seasonal rhythms, and that take us, that blend stars and skies. And here are some languages of the South which all say to be continued. Let's open up for discussion. So it's Maori, Xhosa, and Shona. Thank you very
much. Thank you, Elleke. Thank you. And one second, Elleke. And yeah, perfect. So thank you. That sparked so many personal associations. For one thing, I was thinking of being up in the Cederberg Mountains in January and seeing the Pleiades in the sky near Orion. It's one of those constellations that you have to look at sideways to see properly. Your eye is more sensitive on the side. And I didn't know it was seasonal, so it makes sense that I saw it when I did.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, and I don't know what the status is now of Bruce Chatwin's stories of Aboriginal Australians and the songlines, because that also seems like a literal depiction of this relation of words embedded in landscape, in terms of the story he told of Aboriginals singing the landscape in order to maintain it.
Yeah, I mean, it has become a controversial book because he was probably irresponsible in how he gathered his material and how he put it together, and then how he published it, because he was drawing on communal wisdom. But why it remains a powerful book is because he coined an idea that kind of makes sense. I mean, I think, as I understand from my reading, Indigenous Australian elders, thinkers would prefer the idea of dreaming, but it is that idea of singing the landscape, through to speaking or chanting the words for the particular places as you move through them.
Yeah, no, interesting. And he is an imaginative writer as well, which is also something I see in your work, of you using a combination of your own fiction and imagination as well as research into what is there. But let me open it to the floor. So if people have a question or a comment that they'd like to make, then please raise your virtual hand, and let's see what we can do. I'm trying to get a view where I can see
Azza Mustafa Babakir has raised their hand.
Okay, Azza, I'm going to ask you to unmute. Azza is a colleague here at Humour. Azza, you're going to have to unmute yourself. Yeah, great.
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation. It's really fascinating. My question is, or it's just, I was thinking when I was seeing like how the words came into the English dictionary, and it just came into my mind like when the Roman borrowed words from the Greek, the Roman had to rewrite or reorganize the alphabets. So it kind of gave different kind of, because I mean the way the alphabet is made has it has a numerical value. So every kind of word is giving a particular numerical value. So I want to know, when these words came into did they disrupt that, if we can call it, space, or are they absorbed in the already numerical value that was there? I mean, it's just something I was thinking about. Yeah, I don't know if
Yeah. I mean, I don't know as much as I should about the Greek and Roman piece of the history that you were alluding to. I think what is fascinating about English, and what I think has made English very porous to words from a host of languages with which it has come into contact, is that English is a Creole. It is actually because of the Norman conquest, when the Germanic core of English came up against French, medieval French, that kind of opened the language out. I mean, actually, Afrikaans is similar. Afrikaans is also a Creole language. It's a language of contact and interaction, and an interaction that has often been, violent, and but that has also actually allowed a kind of incredibly fruitful, I mean, some people might call it, sort of a chutney, or a kind of, mixing of influences and words from the different languages that it has absorbed. Because, I mean, just to take the word boomerang, for example, English is enormously enriched by having that word. I'm not sure if other, maybe French has also taken it on now, other European languages. But you know, that idea of there and back again, something that, you know, that insists on coming back to source, is very fruitful. You know, I've thought about calling, or, you know, using an entire chapter of Southern Imagining just to talk about the idea of boomeranging.
Thank you, Carol.
Thank
Thanks, Eza. I mean, not Carol. I'm speaking to the next person. So thank you, Elleke. And Carol, I'm going to ask you to unmute. Yeah. Oh, hang on. Sorry. There you go. Do it once more. Unmute. You're going to have to unmute yourself again.
Okay. Double unmuting.
Sorry about that.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you, Elleke, and also for the heads up this afternoon. I was delighted when I realized this was an online event, and so I was able to attend. So it's really good to see you again. My question comes back to Wittgenstein and Sapir-Whorf, and something that you said a little bit earlier. So if we're going to say, all right, well, our words, our language construct our way of seeing the world, fair enough. And then at the same time, we're saying, well, let's look to Southern words to find other alternative words, or other, and not other, and having other words means other ways of seeing if we take this on trust. And yet, how difficult it is to speak from within English and imagine ourselves as speaking from another place, because we'll always see these indigenous languages as something other than our frame of reference. So just to give you an example from how easy it is to fall into the trap of thinking in English by using it. So one of the things that you said when you showed us the marble picture, you said, oh, but we have to imagine this from a counterintuitive Southern direction. Now, if you are in the South, it's not counterintuitive at all. So, you know, how do we raise our own awareness about, you know, those ruts of thinking that we are blind to ourselves? It's a kind of an unobserved obviousness that we just have from speaking in that language. And how do we become aware of occupying a different thought world to the one that we speak?
Thanks. I mean, it's an absolutely core question, Carol. And actually, I think I said something like, let's dwell in the words, or let's meditate on these words right at the beginning of the talk. And without, if you noticed, I didn't in the first part of the talk, I didn't kind of front load with theory, you know, which is, I think, what we are trained to do. We are all, I would imagine, all present at the seminar have been trained to do that. So you're absolutely right. You know, the South is always referred to as counter in some or other way, Antipodean, upside down, you know, Widdershins, the wrong way about, left hand wise. So what I am personally trying to do, because I grapple with the problem that you've highlighted, you know, every day that I work on this project, is I simply go through kind of some meditative exercises. I try to dwell in these words. Every day I take a different Southern word and I simply look at it, think about it, look at some images relating to it. I do my blue marble exercise. I spin it round. I look at it, you know, contrary wise, which is of course actually the right way about, you know, from a Southern perspective. So that is what I ceaselessly do, because it is very hard philosophically, linguistically, to unthink the habits that we have through a lot of hard work and study been taught. So, it involves application, focus, and a kind of a rededication to being contrary wise, which of course we know is being wise, not contrary wise. If you allow me to be a little bit cryptic by way of answering.
Thank
you,
you,
Elleke. Thank you, Carol. I'm going to turn to my colleague Amina, and behind Amina you can see the beautiful place that our team is at the moment.
Thank you so much, Ralph. Thank you, Elleke. As you were speaking, the sentence that says words embedded in space, words are embedded in spaces, made me think of Basu Keith, wisdom sits in place, and how people are attached to spaces based on the names they give them, and vice versa, and that places carry in them processes of unraveling meaning. And I think I would really love it if you could perhaps share about your own journey, your effective journey with words. How do you relate to words, and how did you come to this theorizing? Thank you.
Wow. Thank you. I mean, how long have you got? I think as somebody who has always had more, because I grew up bilingual and then trilingual, I think I have always been aware that, and I've written a bit about it, that I've always been aware that there is always more than one word for anything, and that is actually when I was young and you want to fit in, that always seemed burdensome to me, but always to have that other voice or that other sound or that other concept, which is never quite the same. The thing about 93 Inuit words for snow, that has always been an incredibly enabling place, I think, to come from linguistically, and partly motivated by that that kind of understanding. When I embarked on this project, I decided to, and I've succeeded to some extent, I decided to learn 2 languages. I learned Spanish because it's a global language. It's of northern provenance, but it is an important language of one of the primary Souths, South America. And I also, and in this lockdown was actually, made this possible. I was able to learn online Gamilaroi, the language that, one of the languages that I referred to at the beginning. Because usually Indigenous Australian languages are, there was some debate about learning this language online and being very remote from the context of learning it, but it did become possible for 1 year, 2021, last year. So that was a journey. You asked about journey, and that was a particularly important journey. I learned so much from learning a language that had, all the other languages I know have European roots, and learning a language that was coming from a completely different space, and its structures were so different in the way in which prepositions worked in the language. It showed me so much about that thing, about embedding, how words are embedded in their locale. But there's so much more to say. Yeah.
Well, perhaps, yeah, seeing as you're at UCT for the next few months, I think, yeah, well, perhaps there'll be an opportunity for further discussion. So thanks,
I'm coming
thanks,
back
Alina.
as well. I'm coming back next year, so we can continue the conversation then.
Great. So we have time for just one more engagement, and there's a comment in the chat from Fanny, another colleague, and I know that you partly do, you know, answer this or talk about this in the texts that we shared for this, where you particularly distinguish between different southern locations. So I think that's something that you're quite clear about, is that the South is not homogeneous and that you need to distinguish between the parts of it. But perhaps you could engage with, you know, some of the other sort of prompts here as in closing.
Yeah, I mean, let me just read it as a way of getting hold of it. I think one of the questions that Fanny asks is, how do we avoid homogeneity within the Southern category and exoticization, that this doesn't become another exotic tool? You are so right. In the Museum of Northern Thought, some Southern geographies have multiple languages. Is the hierarchization of indigenous avoidable in such projects? Indeed. Yeah, and highlighting this in the presentation would be helpful. I completely agree. I mean, and this is why the idea of the archipelago or archipelagic thinking is, I think, you know, I did place it strategically in the talk, because what an archipelago encourages us to do is to see clusters without ranking or kind of organizing them into levels or categories. So that's one thing that I would kind of put on the table in response to the question. And it relates also to the idea or the concept of constellations and constellated thinking, which comes in with the stars. Again, we're not ranking the stars on the basis of how many light years they are away from us. We are looking at them from our vantage point on planet Earth, and we're talking about how we measure up our seasons in relation to the stars, but there isn't a ranking there. But there is a recognition of plurality or pluricentricity, I think was a word that I pulled out, and certainly a move away from, if at all possible, homogenization.
Great. Thank you very much, Elleke. And I can see Fanny is in the room here, but she's just having trouble with her video connection.
Okay.
So thank you. And yeah, constellations is also a word and a motif that is also important to me. I love it as a way of associating elements in a non-hierarchical manner, as you say. Something comes out of the whole. You know, there's discrete elements that together produce another image. And so to archipelagic thinking, which is a concept I was introduced to quite recently by an Irish colleague who works on island studies, and he talked to me about archipelagic thinking. So yeah, very, very interesting. We have a comment in the chat just saying, thanks for a great talk from Chikezi, one of our colleagues. And yeah, I'd like to echo that. Thank you very much, Elleke. That was very elucidating and inspiring. And thank you very much for sharing your work with us. And yeah, we hope to engage with you again soon. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much, Ralph. And I would love to capture well, maybe they'll feature on the video. I'm not sure. I'd love to capture the chat as well, if that were possible.
Yeah, I think so. Let me make sure to do that before I close out. And we will have a video archive of the recording. We captured part of it here, and then part of it is captured on Facebook. But we'll put it together and make it available. So thank you very much. Yeah, it'll be archived.
Thank you very much. Thanks to everyone for coming. Great questions. Really enjoyed that.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks to the audience. Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay. Great. So yeah, Elleke, thank you. That was good.
Slightly kind of, how can I